Hello and welcome to another edition of Real Men Feel. I am Andy Grant, lead feeling man of reality. Um, let's see. I've worked for years as an energy coach. I've been teaching and speaking, going to personal growth events, and I kept seeing time after time how few men were at events. And in my work, how few men I had as clients. This year is really called to make a space where men can explore their actual feelings and have a space to where they're allowed to feel, to share, to express whatever's going on. Thus, the genesis of this movement, of this program. With me, as always, is my co-host, Alpio Hunter.
Greetings.
Alpio, how are you doing today?
Fantastic.
Awesome,
It's been a really awesome day.
Good. Well, let's keep it going.
Oh, yeah. It just keeps getting better.
Cool. And I'm very excited. This week we have our guest is David Morelli. David is a world-renowned coach. He's host of the audience with 1 million plus on iTunes of the Awaken radio show.
Yeah.
And special to me is that David is one of my longest running coaches, mentors, and teachers. In fact, it is David who I learned how to read energy from, something I knew I would do on a daily basis and use with clients all around the world. So a very warm welcome to you, Mr. Morelli.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I mean, I love what you guys are doing here on the show. I think having a platform for men to be able to really explore what it is to be a man while also being sort of attuned to life, their emotions, and all the sort of dynamics of living, I think is a worthwhile platform. So I'm really happy to be on here with you, and to Andy, to have known you for a long time, and Apio to have met you just today. So it's great to be here with you guys.
Awesome. And so, let's see, David, you really were exclusively working in what I will call the woo-woo field, for lack of a better term, and really
right.
Straight spirit, connection to source, reading energy, teaching those sort of skills to people and having live events.
Yep.
But you've made a transition kind of more into business, or more official, proper business, or something like
that. yeah. I kind of made that transition as you said. Yeah. What I found is that oftentimes spirituality does have that woo-woo connotation, and as long as it stays woo-woo, to me, it's going to have a hard time integrating with people's lives in a way that goes all the way down to their moment-to-moment sort of awareness and capability to actually do something with it. So as you know, I follow my intuition. I think that's probably the best thing that you could use as a navigator. And, at one point I saw that, hey, I should go back to school. I should get an executive MBA. And I started working for a friend who I actually was doing energy coaching with. Started working for his company, and they've now grown since I joined them. They've grown from 60 people to 100, and I've coached from CEO all the way down to the front lines, and sort of helping people work at integrating, I'd say, deep truth with what to do in their day-to-day lives that are going to further their careers, their projects, and things like that. So really integrating spirituality and business makes a lot of sense to me, because I feel like you've got to have both worlds working together, not just one of them, and sometimes often opposed, or you might be one opposed to the other. So,
that's really fascinating that you should say that, because one of the things that comes up with me frequently in conversations with some of my clients is there is no separation. There's no separation from anything, and it's this human thing that we have, that that we are separate from our spirituality, that science is separate from the woo-woo worlds, if you will, and that it really is no separation. And I find it fascinating, and I love to see how there is that integration, a slow integration, but now it seems to be accelerating. How more and more people in business, in the scientific community, everywhere, are starting to realize that there is a totality of everything, that there is no exclusivity of one or the other. That by embracing all disciplines, there is a greater reward for that.
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm just listening to, I'm always learning. I think, I hope that people are always learning in their lives, because I find it being, it's a great platform for continuing to grow your awareness, I think, as a man, as a woman, as anybody. But I'm listening to the biography of Einstein, and, he was talking about classical physics, just like you were saying, science, and what they were thinking of classical physics. And then he was really a pioneer of quantum physics, and talking about how light behaves, and light quanta and things like that. And he was talking about how at one point he got really nervous because these two worlds seemed very different, but yet they're all sort of integrating together. And and then he, in his last breaths, was trying to still work out the equations to have those two worlds be a unified theory.
Yeah, the theory of everything. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And what was really funny is, I think that's what sitting in the middle of spirituality and business is some of the same thing, or, everybody's going to have their version of it. But when I first came to do coaching in the corporate realm, I started off with actually an energy tool Andy and I are pretty familiar with. So I started doing this energy tool with this person. And at first they kind of played along. And then I was like, this person isn't getting it. Like they are so in this other world that it's so interesting. They're not getting it. And so what I had to do was start to find where not just one side trying to apply it to the other, but really sort of moving into the in-between.
Yes, the integration.
Yeah. And finding that people started, when I would go into the practical, they'd start bringing up the energetic. Or when I would bring up the energetic, they would start going into the practical. And at first I thought, I'm doing something wrong. The energetic isn't working, for the first 2 or 3 sessions, but then I found this middle ground. And I think that's what life is about, is being able to take 2 oppositional forces in your life, or perceptions of 2 different forces. And I think there's one person who says to hold 2 seemingly opposites and not go crazy.
yeah, exactly.
It's all energy. Let's get down to practicality.
That's the quantum part.
Yeah.
You mentioned intuition, and I think like lots of studies and books and biographies I've read, lots of excellent business leaders do rely and recognize their intuition.
Yep.
But I think if you told them, that's your spirituality, they're like, whoa, they might back off. Like that's kind of somehow a line, right?
It's not spirituality. That's my gut feeling.
Yeah, right. That's just me. It's just because I know things.
Yeah.
Okay, terms, semantics, really. That's how.
Yeah. Well, I just saw a quote earlier on today, actually, also from Bill Gates, that said, often you need to rely on your intuition. So people at the top of, hardcore science, software coding, the zeros and ones, and that's what makes everything work, realize also that it's intuition. So I think there's a lot of great models out there, but we don't necessarily think about them. Even Warren Buffett, you guys probably heard of him, the great investor. He talks about, he looks at all of the data based on whether he's going to invest in a company or not. And once he looks at the data, then he asks himself, which is the right choice? And he goes with his gut. He goes with his intuition, because he realizes that at the end of the day, he has to look at himself in the mirror and stand behind his own decision. And so his last point of the decision is his gut feel. And I think there's a great blend for people to realize that you can have both, and that you need to have both. And if you only have one without the other, it's a little bit like having one hand tied behind your back.
Yeah.
It's a matter of which one do you want to have tied behind your back. Well, right answer probably would be neither. I want to have both in my hands.
Yeah,
it's really helpful. So
have your cake and eat it.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Why not? That's my favorite question right now. Is why not?
Yeah.
I love asking that question. I love playing with it. In fact, one of the things that when I'm working with folks, I always ask them, okay, you're presented with these choices. Which one feels better? Which one makes you really lights you up? Which one is the happiest one? Mm-hmm. Which one do you feel happiest with? That's you listening to your intuition. That's you listening to your gut.
Yep. I'm really glad you guys are doing this, because I know you're both on the track of integrating these worlds, and obviously otherwise you wouldn't be doing this. You'd be speaking to each other through the ethers and saying like, what do you think? I don't know. Exactly. You'd be mind melding, and none of us would get to participate. So glad you're both doing this and doing work in the world, where you're offering coaching and helping people work through this. So.
For sure.
Speaking of integration, what's your goal, bringing your energy background, your spirituality, and the MBA? What's your integration goal for what you're going to do next?
It's kind of interesting. I'm not sure. It's funny. You'd think, well, if you know how to use your intuition, then you'd always have the answers. But it kind of doesn't work that way. It's like you have you're turn on your intuition, so that when the answer is there, you can hear it, more readily than not. So I'm kind of sitting in the question, actually, and there's lots of different directions I could go. Through I see that I could build a company that I would start. I could run a company that somebody else has started, or who knows what combination of other things I could, do coaching or help train people in the integration between spirituality as well as corporate coaching. Because interestingly enough, once I came into this organization and found this integration point, the company grew 35% year over year, and they're a fairly substantial company. And so those numbers captured the attention of a lot of people who I was just like, oh yeah, no big deal. I mean, there's 35% year over year for the last 2 years. And you're like, no, people don't actually grow that much. Like that's huge. And really it's about removing the obstacles that people are facing in, their day-to-day lives, how they're thinking about whatever they're working on. And if they get stuck internally or in their thinking, then they're going to come out some skewed way. But if you can help them work through their internal blocks or through their clarity blocks, people will often do some amazing things. So it's just a matter of helping people get to higher level thinking and or more internal congruence with what they're doing, so that they can free themselves up. And whether that's you're helping them with efficiency or time management, which seems very practical, or you're helping them with a communication issue that they're not feeling heard or valued or something like that. I mean, there's lots of different versions of how to help somebody get unblocked, and or what do you want to do with your career? Where do you want to go with your life? And helping people get aligned there, which brings new passion and energy, which ends up getting better results. So it's kind of fascinating how integrating these things actually does hit pretty substantial real world results. So.
Yeah, people can recognize that sports is the most obvious place where, people have coaches and they want to get in the flow and a natural state and everything goes easy. But that natural state can exist in everything you're doing.
Yeah.
So your own blocks to loving yourself or feeling unworthy or not expressing your emotions,
yep.
you take all that to work as well.
I guess that's why we call it a natural state, right?
Yep. Yeah, right. And, here when we're doing coaching, we have a philosophy that, you can work on stuff that's strictly professional, but you can also work on things that are personal, because really you have one brain, when you show up at work and you have something really intense going on at home, you don't switch it off. It's sitting with you all day, or vice versa. And so at least how I think about it is, you want your professional life experience to positively spill over into your professional life. You also want your professional life to positively spill over into your personal life. So if you can get fulfillment on both ends, and have them sort of be in a virtuous cycle, I think that's what it's about. But I don't think a lot of people live that way. I think they compartmentalize, and then usually they're suffering versions of some pain or discomfort in each one. And then it's a non-virtuous cycle.
That's fascinating that you should bring that up, because I noticed that is very much a symptom of our cultural conditioning of separation. Everything has to be separate. We are separate from the divine. We are separate from each other. We are separate from, there's this constant drumbeat. Separation. Same thing in science as well, in the scientific disciplines. We can only believe what we can validate and replicate using our five senses. And yet in the quantum, especially in the quantum fields, we know that's definitely not the case. That that the results of an experiment can be influenced by the observer himself. And so, when we start to break down these barriers and let go, I like to use the term let go or release this idea of separation and more embrace and step into, even if it's baby steps, just ease into this idea of totality instead. That's when everything balances out. That's when everything lines up.
Yep. It's really interesting. Was something that you said just had a little thought pop in, which is Einstein was talking about there is no absolute. There's no absolute time. There's no absolute space. That actually, when you get traveling at various speeds, like the speed of light, everything compresses and or time warps.
Yes.
So it could be various versions of that. So a slower time period. And he actually said, well, if somebody spent their whole lives on a airplane, it's only going 500 miles an hour, but they would be, I think 50 microseconds off, as a result, because they're going at speed, they're aging differently, and so what's interesting though, is when we do energy work, I don't know if you guys have experienced this, I'm sure you guys have on some level, is when you do energy work, it's almost like time shifts, right? Like you could spend a really good, let's say 10-minute meditation and it feels like you were there for an hour. Well, why is that? Well, because time, your perception of time is bending. And so whatever ends up being clock time is different than your internal experience time. And I think a lot of people, one thing that if I was to recommend anything, is to have a practice where you can slow time down, whether it's meditation, whether it's energy work, whether it's, deep conversations with a coach like you guys, or, those types of things where time starts to shift. The more that you can do that, I think the more that you're tapping into the non-relative, sort of nature of life, where you can have things expand. So,
and that's very contrary to what society tells us, especially in business. I need to get all this stuff done. Well, then I better get going faster and be doing more. But to relax, can I really take 5 minutes and slow down? And but it proved, vacations, even corporate retreats, when people get recharged, when they allow to relax, they perform better after that. And even just a power nap. Like if you don't believe in meditation or energy work, like to go take a 20-minute nap and see how different you are.
I'm up with a nap. Yeah. I'm a napper.
Yeah. That's awesome. It's funny. There was a quote from Mother Teresa as well as the Dalai Lama. They each said this in their different way, but they basically said every day, if it's a busy day, they meditate 2 hours in the morning. If it's a really busy day, they meditate 3. Because they can't actually get everything done in a day unless they really are centered and have that space where they can sort of bend time. So to some degree, how much of the time do we say like, oh, I've got to get a lot done, just like you said. And to some degree, you're compressing time, right? Because your fear basically compresses time. Relaxation opens time, opens your ability to think. It's like when time slows down, right? And
I love that. In fact, I have played with that a lot, very recently, in fact, where it's like I look at this big long list of all of these things I want to get done during the day. And what I do is instead I play with the just being now, being in the moment, playing with the now, this idea that the only time that truly exists is now. And how the practice of consciousness is getting to be all the rage, especially in the corporate world. And more entrepreneurs and CEOs and many people are talking about mindfulness and being conscious and present and everything. And for me, that practicing basically means having fun right now, doing what I'm doing, forgetting everything else, not looking at the elephant, but just right here, right now, because otherwise the elephant will I'll either choke on it, or it will sit on me. So it's like it's not going to be fun. I just am doing whatever it is that I'm doing right now. I don't look at the clock. I don't pay attention to the time. Somehow, funny enough, time warps. And as long as I'm conscious and worried about the time, I stress myself out. If I ignore it, I just get into it, just have fun with it. Somehow everything gets taken care of.
Yep. That's really powerful. I usually set my phone for a certain amount of time. Usually I'll say 90 minutes. There's some scientific research that talks about your brain being able to really deeply focus for 90 minutes. So I set it for 90 minutes. I turn it upside down. And by minute 20, I swear possible, I have the discipline to, to not, and then I end up going, wow, I got a whole day's worth of work done. But I almost I take it out of my mind and I put it onto my phone, the responsibility to keep time. And I think that's really, like you said, you play with it, you have fun, you just get into it, you don't think about time, and then you end up expanding it. And I think that's really a powerful way to work.
And it's fascinating that you should mention that 90-minute increment, because that's exactly what I've noticed is within 90 minutes, boom, it's done. It's again, that natural state. When you're talking about playing with the now and playing with time, and Andy and I have had this conversation before when we're conversing with colleagues in other parts of the world. I love to use Australia as an example, how we are talking to them in our future. They are talking to us in their past, but really we're just talking to each other now.
Right.
I mean, what better real world example do we have than that time is an illusion, that time is relative?
Yep. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. when I was first in the Awaken program with David, learning how to read energy, I would bring it into work, and I worked at a high tech company at that point, and I was 60-hour work week would be a light week.
Sorry to hear that.
Like projects would come my way, and I would look at the energy of a project, and if it just in my mind, if it just there was nothing there, I'm like, well, that's interesting, and I look at another project, and there'd be a lot of light, there'd be a lot of energy there. I'm like, well, I'm just gonna work on this thing that has the energy there. It would go easy. I'd ignore the projects that had nothing, and every single time I did that, I'd get an email. Oh, sorry, I wasted your time. I hope you didn't work on that other project. It got canceled. I'm like, no problem.
Right. Yeah, totally.
So I was more productive and working less, getting noticed, and because I was willing to bring energy, bring spirituality into my business setting. It wasn't just for Sunday or for asking for things or trying to use the law of attraction to make magic happen, but really using it as a tool as good as email, but just like, oh, let's look at this project. Let's look at that one. Which one has more energy to it? And it never steered me wrong. It's
amazing. I think it's the great untapped resource that each of us has, at our disposal. But yet we sort of, how do I say it? Like we doubt it to the point where we can't get a clear answer because we're doubting it. Just like, you can't really focus on a project if you're always thinking about what time it is or how much pressure you're under or whatever. It's like it does something sort of negative to the clarity. So I was actually just teaching a class earlier today talking about intuition, and you have to really open yourself up to allowing intuition to sort of bubble up or to emerge. And there's various styles of intuition. I'm sure you guys have in some way, shape, or form gone over these, but the knowingness off the top of your head, so that you don't know why you know, but you just know.
You just know, right?
There's the sort of flash of an intuition, like the spark of an idea, like seeing a friend's like almost their image out in front of you and saying like, oh, I should call that person, and that's that's also how innovation works or creativity works. There's that still small voice within, and there's whether you're drawn to somebody or not, which is sort of more of a heart level. There's the gut feel and various, feeling senses like, oh, I get a bad feeling when I think about that person, and, using that as intuition. So I think there's so much information that if we don't tap into it, it's sort of ridiculous not to. But what I always say is people are learning it is to try the small things, like when you start with a menu, when you go to the restaurant, what do I want to eat? And just looking, and maybe it's you come across one and you're like, yeah, that. Well, what is that? Is that your digestive system, like your gallbladder releasing a little chemical and hormone saying, yes, I crave whatever it is? Well, maybe, but to some degree you might just sense like, where does that yes come from? And the more that you can then use that with from the small consequence things like what you're going to eat for that day to, well, which way should I go home today? And then sort of letting an idea come to you, and then, building up progressively to then saying, what do I do with my career? Like, don't jump to career first because there's too much fear and noise in that space and shoulds and, social, things that go along with that. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, again, like I said, that's how I chose to take the MBA program. I ended up with the CEO here. He and I have been, working together for 6 or 7 years. And I said to him one day, I was like, hey, what would happen if I came in and, coached the company? He's like, that sounds like a great idea. Let's try it for 90 days. And that was, a little over 2 years ago. So intuition is really the thing I think that helps you make big leaps, but you have to be willing to listen to it in small moments. Big leaps in small moments is kind of how I think about intuition.
Yeah. I love that.
So in the business world, maybe it's like little things like what's the best time for this meeting?
Yeah.
Like inconsequential things, right? Yeah. Or, who's the best person to involve on this team I'm putting together?
Yep.
Right?
And those ones can sometimes get tricky because your mind, like, well, is it my mind or is that my intuition? That's a debate that people get into a lot of times. So, you can absolutely do it with those. You can do it with which next item should I do on my to-do list? That's another good one that I think all of them are going to get done, but which one are you going to do now? Like, that's another good one to practice with. And then, like you said, eventually you'll, which of these 3 ideas that we could do as a department, or, which of these should we go after? Like, that's the next level. And then, it might be like larger and larger questions that you would ask, but you want to really gain mastery at the lower levels sort of before going all in on the bigger ones. If that makes sense.
It's kind of like building that pyramid. You want to lay the very solid foundation before going up, because otherwise, it won't be pretty.
Yep.
Right, because you could be getting the $1 million ideas and answers, but if you don't trust it, it's worthless.
And there's also a level, as you guys have probably explored, fear. So and real men feel, right? So to some degree, if you're not willing to feel, you might get sort of something pop up. And it might be actually a fear-driven thing. How I usually tell if it's fear-driven is that there's usually less space. It feels compressed or tight, or you sort of get anxious, and usually that it's going to be the silver bullet. Like, oh, that's going to be the thing that saves me, right? If you go from that, it's usually fear-driven. Versus, like, intuition tends to come as like, ooh, like, that could work.
Let's try this. Why not?
Like you said, there's a level of play to it. And so if it's fear-driven, sometimes it's sabotage-driven, which is why you want to master the lower-level stuff first. Because if you're in fear, or basically you haven't felt it, you haven't felt, let's say you're really panicked about your job, and you're like, what should I do? And they're like, oh, I know, I could, go and, go oil drilling with my brother, and, we're going to find the next biggest thing. Like, all right, like, maybe, but that might be you trying to get out of something. And if you're not willing to feel the fear of, I might be homeless, or I might go broke, or people might repossess my house or my car, or a lot of that stuff, if you're not willing to feel that stuff and be willing to face that those might be real possibilities and sort of own them, and also own your vision and your dream, then your intuition is going to be skewed by what you're not willing to feel. Sort of going back to what you guys created the show for. I think if there's anything that, if it's shame or if it's anger or resentment or things like that, those are all noise and will give you false positives, if you will, for your intuition. But I also think you'll create out of those things, consciously, subconsciously, or whatever. But those are usually the things that end up driving people into the guardrails of life.
And then as much of the places that tell men feeling is bad and not welcome, there may be no stronger place of that sense than corporate America.
Yeah.
Right. That's not a place that says, come on into the boardroom and share your feelings with us.
That's really interesting. But there are certain emotions that are accepted. Anger, resentment, revenge. Those types of things that are a little more sort of mutated young, It's like the sort of male aggressive energy. And I think if you're not willing to feel the fear that's underneath those, then you're really doing yourself a disservice, as well as probably your company and things like that.
And so much of that is driven by the culture. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But
I believe that energy, that level of consciousness and awareness is why so many companies have a quick ascent and decline quickly, or so many businesses launch and fail quickly.
Yeah.
I'd love to find a study of, if you could study the emotional intelligence of business leaders and how well they perform.
Yeah. Funny, there is a surge within, call it corporate America, or, some version of that, within corporations, about emotional intelligence. And I've actually found that your ability as a leader to be attuned emotionally to those around you, attuned to yourself, self-awareness, and sort of attuned to your customers is actually a main driver of success. So I think that's changing subtly. But I think a lot of people still have the sort of energetic hangover from a lot of bad training, a lot of bad programming within their systems. So.
And how much of that is also driven not just by the training and what we see around us in the corporate world, but also just media and the popular portrayals that we see either in movies or on TV or anything else. We always see the portrayals of all of the bad bosses, the bad salesmen, all the dysfunctional stuff.
Right.
And the way I see it is that, so much of that is representative of the dysfunction, and it's changing. So therefore, we pay attention to it because it's not the norm. The boring stuff, the gradual recognition of emotional intelligence and integrating these disciplines into our companies and into corporate life or entrepreneurial life, for that matter.
Yep.
It's boring. It's not exciting. So
right.
It doesn't sell ad space.
Yeah. there is a sort of seeking of drama. You know, recently I was over in Hong Kong and Myanmar, which is formerly Burma. So I was in those two countries, and what's interesting is those are very relationship-oriented cultures, where in the United States it's very individualistic, and it has healthy parts and unhealthy parts, right? Because if you can think for yourself, like in the United States, and some might say it's arguable that people think for themselves in the United States, but regardless of that, there's an individualistic, like I'm going to follow my dreams, you know. But over there, it's very collectivist, meaning like, what am I able to do based on who's around me? And, you know, people don't want to stick out. They don't want to shine. But in the United States and in Western cultures, it's very shine, reward centric. And so, you know, I think sort of the yin and the yang of the world, I think there's health and imbalance in both sides. You know, to some degree, in the West, we need to become more conscious of who's around us and the culture and the impact that we're having, including on the earth and on one another, and those who are less advantaged than we are. You know, I was hanging out with orphans and, you know, and people who make less than $2 a day, you know, so how different is that than in the West? And, you know, whoever's watching this at least has the privilege enough to have a computer and to have internet and to have, you know, arguably, you know, you have electricity and you have a roof over your head. Or, I mean, we have a lot more than a lot of people around the world, most of the people around the world.
Sure.
But over there, they really take care of each other. And, you know, they take care of who's around them. And happiness tends to be more of a priority. And so, you know, again, in the West, we tend to have a lot more stuff, but a lot less happiness. And I found that when I lived in West Africa for 4 months as well, in Mali, out sort of near Timbuktu, which my grandmother always used to say, by the way, she's like, if you don't behave, we're going to ship you off to Timbuktu. And so
I right up there.
I actually gave her a call as I was crossing the river into Timbuktu. You know, I was like, Grandma, I'm about to be in Timbuktu. You always said that I'd end up here. You know, so, anyway. But sort of that balance between, you know, happiness and what you want, pursuing your dreams, and what do you think success is, and not to, you know, keep sort of going on that track, but, you know, I think a lot of people pursue out of trying to get out of an emotion. You know, they pursue success, they pursue goals, they pursue dreams or financial whatever rewards, and you see that a lot in business. You know, it's like, why are you doing what you're doing? Well, because I want to get ahead. Well, you know, that's usually they're avoiding a feeling of some kind of, yeah, whatever that is, whether it's inadequacy or whether it's shame or whether it's, you know, that they don't feel like enough. And, you know, in myself, I've experienced that, you know, to some degree. And actually part of my journey recently has been stepping out of the limelight and sort of not leading a big organization that's, you know, doing transformational work and things like that. Like, it's, to some degree, it's, you want to step into your purpose. And then to some degree, you want to make sure that your purpose isn't about trying to solve some pain in you. And so to me, part of the journey has actually been being willing to be normal, i.e. average, i.e. not notable, you know, not, you know, whatever. And so it's been about becoming less and less unique and actually more and more sort of bland. But part of that is finding balance and making sure that whatever it is that I do out in the world isn't about me doing it out in the world, that it's almost just some service coming through me. And, you know, whether people find it useful or not, you know, hopefully they do, but if not, you know, it's more trying to create a sense of being a conduit for something greater to come through, but yet not be about me or about, you know, anything.
I like to call that the expression of one's personal joy. Now, I'm expressing my joy in a way that feels good for me, that brings me great satisfaction. The doors of invitation are always going to be open. I'm going to invite anybody and everybody who wishes to step into that space to participate in that expression of joy with me. But I'm not going to force anybody at the door and say, you have to come in here. It's there. It simply is. It's like always an open invitation. And I find that certainly has served me well. And every time I've noticed, for instance, like you and Andy, when you do the same thing, you may not necessarily term it in that particular way, but that's exactly the work that you do. You follow your passions, you follow your intuition, you follow these, whatever it is that lights you up. And always the door is open. Say, come along. You're happy. Come and play with me. But if you don't want to, that's okay too, because I'm happy playing in this space anyway, no matter what.
It takes a little bit of faith to do that too. It takes a sense of trust.
A lot of faith.
It does. Yeah. It does.
Yeah. Just like letting yourself not think about the clock, and the amount of whatever time is going by. It's like you have to surrender into the moment. To some degree, you have to surrender into that life will provide for you. If you're really sincere about it and you're doing what's in your power and releasing what's not, I mean, that sort of blend of like that space of joy and expectation and openness, like nobody likes to feel grabbed onto. You can always tell whether somebody's going to be successful or not by how grabby they are with their clients. Like if they're grabby, they're not going to, but at the same time, they can't like push them away subtly either. You have to have this sort of blend of, I really enjoy working with you, or, I'd really love to find out what we can do together. Here's some of the ideas that I have. What ideas do you have? And it's sort of that like unattached engagement and that blend. And I can tell that that's, in the both of you have that quality. But it's a funny dance, right? Because the ego will try and grab onto something and define, but then at the same time, you can't go the opposite direction either and say, oh, well, then I'm not going to be attached to anything. It's like you have to be willing to be in that sort of unknown dance that's your sincere intention coming through without closing in around it.
Because when it comes down to it, every business is a service.
Yep.
And when all people, and especially men, are willing to be like heart-centered in their service, that everything can unfold easier. And that attraction of people, and people can sense that and feel that, even if they don't know that it's spiritual, energetic, or whatever. But people just, we've all seen, jobs that I can't imagine having and being happy at. I've seen individuals who love it. A guy driving a bus or cleaning the streets, or I've visited lots of third world countries and see people carrying bricks on their head, whistling and happy every single moment of it. It seems right. And if you're right, you're not avoiding what you're feeling. You're not avoiding the moment that you're in. Like everything is really possible. Cool.
Yep. I keep finding life is about integration of opposites, and the more that you can, like the person with the bricks on their head, it's like their lives are so simple. They're not attached to much, but yet they're just making enough money, presumably, for that day. Andy, you've probably seen, maybe you both have, the stores, the little like 3x3 tin hut shacks where they literally sell individual cigarettes because people live day to day. They're like, all I can buy is that cigarette, that stick of gum, or, a single serving of dish or laundry soap that they're just going to use that soap for that day to clean their clothes for the next day, and then earn their keep for the next day. And I think there's something really simple about that. And, it's said, I forget where it's said, but, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. It's like, it's really, you go through and it's how much light you can bring to what you're doing, not that you're supposed to be doing something that has a lot of light associated with it. And so as I'm going more and more towards business and the business world, my intention, hopefully it works, is to bring light to those spaces, to the practicality, to realize that, you need both. Like you need the physics of, Newton. Let's say you drop an apple and, you can expect that it's going to hit the floor. Like you need that, right? But then if you only have one of those things, you're missing the sort of magic and wonder of life, which ends up being the quantum physics side. But if you only have the quantum physics side and you can't even figure out where to grab an apple to, nourish your body, which is very physicalized, like you need both. And so I think it's a little bit like being a caretaker, for the life that you're given and for the lives around you. And, the more that you can genuinely, not sort of martyr style, but genuinely take care of those around you and take care of yourself and to really put your attention on what really needs my attention in this moment. And maybe that might be intuition that tells you that. But it's really being open and sensing and being willing to feel and being willing to open to to the input that's there, engaging actively in life.
It's that
whether
duality.
that's in business,
like we are spiritual and physical, and until you accept and embrace both, life is pretty difficult. And we're also we can be at home and with friends and family, and we can be at work. And if we somehow think we have to be different in those places, again, it's
there are
difficult.
two words that keep repeating over and over in my head as I've been listening and as we've been having this wonderful conversation. Two words just keep repeating over and over and over again in my head, which is totality and integration. It feels like it boils down to being aware of the totality of who we are and the totality of everything that's available to us and that exists, and integrating it into every part of our lives.
Yep.
Absolutely.
And part of integration is non-judgment and or owning your judgment, right? Because sometimes when you're in one aspect of you and your life, part of that totality, you'll judge another part. If you're feeling really good, you're like, oh, but I don't want to go back to feeling bad. You judge it, right? Or if you're in a really bad mood, and you see somebody who's really happy, it's kind of like, why are you so happy? That's sort of right. Yeah. And or you're in one practical part of your life and you're judging that part of you, like, oh, I can't take time for spirituality. And sometimes when you get into, let's say, a meditation, you're like, but I don't want to go back to doing my taxes, or whatever. Like, but it's about flowing in between, and part of flowing in between is stripping off.
I love that you bring that up also, because
and integrating, like you're saying, totality
common
and integration.
Theme comes up in conversations that I have with not just clients, but oftentimes with myself, and that is Source does not judge. Whatever it is that you want to do, Source is okay with it. They're not going to judge it. Judgment is a very human thing. It's a very, it is. We love labels. We love compartmentalizing. We love labels. We love putting things into boxes and moving them around and trying to make them all look pretty and so forth. When you really pay attention to our intuition and to our connection with Source, because we're never separated from it, we start to realize that there is no judgment. Source is always okay with whatever direction that we go, whatever decision that we make. It's okay. It's not that big of a deal. But
yeah. Right. What's interesting is balancing that. I love that, and I agree.
Yes.
Is balancing that with also taking full responsibility for the results of where it is, for what you've created. To some degree, if you had an angry moment, you have to own, I was coming. This is where I was coming from, and to sort of self-forgive, but then also acknowledge it within a relationship, and that balance between Source doesn't judge. Absolutely. There is no judgment there. And can you be non-judgmental of what you create and own when you drive your car into the guardrail of life? Like, wow, all right, now I have some work to do and some repairs to make. And how can you go through that compassionately? Because to some degree, it's that tension of owning, non-judgment, and how do you do those two things together without avoiding responsibility
that's aligning our human experience with the totality
and getting really in that sort of
that's the integration,
tension,
the symbiosis, if you will, that symbiotic partnership
of
taking full responsibility, integrating it all together.
Nice.
Yeah.
And know that responsibility doesn't mean blame. Like without taking responsibility, I can't change anything. Like it all starts there.
Yeah. Totally. What's really fun is, as we're having this conversation, where one of my professors, he was a former executive at Starbucks, and one of his favorite words is juxtaposition, and one of his other favorite words is synthesis. So, like seemingly opposite things, and the sort of dynamic tension between those, which we're talking about, and then synthesis. And you had talked about the various things, the various topics, and you just put them all together, right? That ability to create cohesion. In neuroscience, they actually talk about cognitive dissonance, which means when you're not aligned internally, but then when you do, it's like everything fits. And how do you make everything fit? And I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I think it's an exploration, of how am I feeling? How can I strip the judgment off of what I'm feeling, own whatever feelings I'm having, let them sort of transmute and then reintegrate with myself, and then live my life a little bit more whole.
Well, we've been going for about 45 minutes, so we might want to wrap this up soon. But before we do, David, where can people find out more information about you and connect with you?
I have the Enwaken radio show, which is Enwaken. Enwaken is ENWAKEN. So Enwaken on iTunes.com, or you can just search Enwaken in iTunes. That's one easy way. And then also they can come to the Enwaken website, although we're going to give it a big revamp to sort of be more about the topics that we're talking about here today. So up until now, it's been mostly spirituality based. And
that's Enwaken.com.
To both business and spirituality. So
yeah. So still spirituality based, but now again, right. But as we're saying, everything's spirituality based. So you're
moving it in totality now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but it's not just this aspect of life; it's everything.
Yeah, coming up on the radio. Yeah, coming up on a coming radio show. I'm interviewing the CEO of VMware, and I don't know if you guys have heard of that. It's like a $4 billion company, and he's going to be talking about the integration, like work-life balance, and how to integrate your spiritual side along with business as well. So, that's a hot topic, I think, in the universe.
Awesome.
So you guys are picking well.
We'll be back next week live on the 21st at our normal time at 5 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be talking about living heroically. Until then, you can find out more about us and this whole Real Men Feel movement at realmenfeel.org. We also have Real Men Feel can be found in iTunes and on SoundCloud, and we have the Real Men Feel group in Facebook. Any parting words this week, Apio?
Other than embrace everything. Embrace everything, take responsibility for everything, and just live in the moment, love life, and have fun. Have fun, have fun, have fun. I cannot emphasize that enough.
Cool.
Awesome, guys! Thanks for hosting this show. I think you guys are doing a great service in the world, and thanks for. I really had fun tonight, so thanks for sharing your energy, and I hope a lot of people got good stuff out of this conversation, and hopefully more with you guys.
And we're glad to have you back, and thanks for joining us today. All right, take care, everyone.
You bet. Yep. Thanks.